Good morning, everyone. I know people are still filtering in, but we want to be respectful of your time, so we'll get started. My name is Dana Fattore Crumley, and I'm here with my colleague Kristen. And we are going to talk to you this morning as we get ready for IEP season about IEP team preparation and participation at the meeting. We came to this idea after Kristen attended an IEP meeting, and there was attorneys at the meeting, and she was the only one that spoke. We can't have that. That does not comply. I know as attorneys, we love to speak and we take every opportunity to speak, but that is not the way an IEP meeting is supposed to work. So we're going to have Kristen get us started here. Let's get going.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about IEP meeting preparation, just kind of some of the basics to kind of discuss and figure out beforehand to make sure you're starting off on a good foot with both the parents and making sure that the IEP team members feel like they're prepared for the meeting. So I think the first step to ensuring a successful IEP meeting and building trust with the parents and confidence in the team members that are going to be talking about their student at the meeting is complying with the pre-meeting timelines. So the first part of this is sending out meeting notifications no later than 10 calendar days prior to the meeting. Those notices need to include the purpose and time and location of the meeting, who will be in attendance at the meeting, and informing parents of their right to invite individuals who have knowledge or special expertise of the student. Now, I understand sometimes it's hard to know exactly who's going to be attending the meeting 10 days out before the meeting, but do your best to put the position and the name of the individual. You can always amend the notice as needed as you get closer. And I do just want to flag this because it has come up previously. A calendar invitation does not suffice for notice purposes under the IDEA. So make sure you're actually sending out that letter form that I think usually your system that you use for IEPs will generate. So make sure you're sending that out with all of this information. That's going to help set the meeting up for success. So part of that notice is including the team members that are going to be at the meeting. Under IDEA, you do actually have to have specific members at the meetings for the students. Here's a list of the individuals that should be at each meeting. Now, whether the child attends or not, that's completely up to the parents, and whether the parents choose to invite any individuals who have knowledge or expertise regarding the student, that's also up to them. But as far as related service members, general education teachers, special education teachers, LEAs, and any other individual that's involved in the student's IEP who's at the district, you need to make sure that those team members are present. And if they're not, that's something that you need to flag for the parents as soon as the meeting starts. And you need to make sure that they're okay waiving the presence of that individual. And even beyond the parent waiving that individual's attendance, you also need to be thinking whether it's appropriate to be moving forward with the meeting without that individual. Not having certain people, if let's say the student is, they have an SLD in reading, and their teacher who is there, who's providing all of the reading classes to them, who knows the most about their reading, if they can't attend, you need to be thinking critically about whether you should actually be moving forward with that IEP meeting because that's the person who's most knowledgeable about the student's skills and deficits in that area. And when talking about placement, about accommodations, and about services, you really do kind of need that individual present. So, kind of before the meeting gets started, think critically about who's going to be there and make sure that the right individuals are there so that you can set the team up for success and make sure you're creating an IEP that is going to be kind of standing up to scrutiny if we end up going to due process. So the second part of meeting those pre-meeting timelines is 3-day drafts. Make sure you're sending those out at least 3 days prior to the student's IEP meeting. So that's going to be any kind of copies of written materials that are going to be considered by the team at the meeting. So this can be evaluations, it can be data that the team has been collecting over a period of time about the student. This is going to be for students who already have an IEP. This is going to be the draft IEP. One point, always make sure you're not sending out the placement page and you're not sending out the related service page. So the full draft IEP should be sent out except for those pages. Those are going to be things that are determined at the meeting. And I know this happens a lot, but if you forget to send out 3-day drafts and you're past that timeline, this is something that you do need to address with the parents before the IEP meeting. So if there's an attorney involved, reach out to the attorney. They can handle communications with the parent's attorney or advocate. But if there's no attorney involved, you need to be reaching out directly to the parents, letting them know that, drafts have not been provided per the 3-day timeline. Are they okay and comfortable moving forward with the IEP meeting, or would they prefer to schedule? That puts the ball in the parents' court so that you're making sure you're offering them enough time to reschedule if they need more time with the drafts. And then if they're choosing to move forward, that's their decision, and it kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off of you.
Yeah, this is such an important rule, and I think that we've been seeing a lot of issues with it. You definitely want to keep in mind that, first of all, to include every relevant person. And I think that, like, when parents have attorneys, and sometimes this can be difficult because attorneys can fade in and out of cases. But if you know a parent has had an attorney in the past, you want to make sure that you are providing the documents to parents, and I think that is your legal obligation. But sometimes I also recommend to provide the document to an attorney. I don't know if any of you work with pro bono organizations, and pro bono organizations are providing attorneys to parents, but oftentimes those parents do not look at emails, they don't respond. And if you don't include the attorney and then the attorney doesn't get in advance, sometimes you have a problem and that just delays the timeline, and then you have timeline preparation. So, I mean, I have lots of conversations with people about, well, I don't have to invite this person, and I don't, that's the parent's job to get their attorney. And those things are all true. And I know it can be frustrating, but sometimes it's better to just over plan and make sure you have those draft documents to everybody, including a parent attorney, by the 3-day deadline. Sometimes parents' attorneys are fine about it, and other times they're really not. And sometimes you're at the very end of your timeline for an evaluation, and if someone has a fit and can't have the meeting because they didn't get the drafts, that could throw everything up in the air in terms of meeting timelines that you're supposed to meet for ISB. So just something to keep in mind.
So another thing, it is so crucial to talk to team members before an IEP meeting. Pre-meeting is not predetermination. You don't predetermine anything, but you need to be talking to your team members before an IEP meeting occurs, because team members can't be afraid to make a parent upset or to say what they need to say. Their input is critical to making an IEP that fits the student's needs, and also is going to be valid and can hold up if for some reason we are going to do process hearing. So in advance of the meeting, whether you're having a pre-meeting with multiple members at once, or whether you're talking to some of those related service providers and teachers individually, it is super important to talk to them and make sure they have talking points and issues they know they need to review in advance of the meeting, and that they're prepared to speak about once the meeting starts. Sometimes,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Dana.
No, I was just going to say this is such a critical thing to do. You really need to have a plan going into the meeting, pre-meeting, to set an agenda, to identify who is going to talk about what. It's really important to present sort of a holistic picture at an IEP. One person who's bossy all the time talking or repeating things over and over again does not really build trust or confidence. Think about it as, really everyone brings their own set of expertise to the table, and you want to highlight that expertise. That's the whole purpose of IDEA. That the social worker understands social emotional development, that the speech pathologist understands language development and language skill. So really you want to make sure that everyone understands that, especially, younger staff members that may not be as seasoned in IEPs, because I think they're just really two separate skills in terms of teaching kids and talking to parents. And really, teachers have to be good at both in this situation. And so it may take a little extra practice.
Yeah, and part of that practice too is kind of anticipating and talking about what parents are going to be concerned about and what possible issues are going to arise during the meeting, because if things get contentious and parents are asking a lot of questions or they're objecting to things, staff members can't be afraid to respond to those questions and to kind of push back on what they're seeing in the classroom. They need to be honest about what they're seeing. They need to use the data and observations that they have. They need to be kind of confident in their own expertise as the individuals who are seeing the student and interacting with them on a daily basis. Um, and they need to be responding to these questions that parents have and any concerns that they have. So that is something that can be talked about before the meeting with them to kind of iron out what they're going to say if certain issues come up and how they're going to respond or what's good data to point to. If, let's say, placement is going to be an issue, because a lot of the times placement is a very, very big issue. And sometimes what we're seeing is when we get to placement discussions and IEP meetings, the LEA is oftentimes the person who's speaking, or it's the attorney who's speaking. But really, when we're having a placement discussion, we need input from all of the school team members to be speaking about why a placement is or is not appropriate and what the reasons for that are, what they're seeing in the classroom, what they're seeing when they're dealing with the student as far as their skill levels, their deficits. So we need to kind of be prepared, each team member, to speak on those different issues and why, from their individual perspective in their role as an SLP or as a general education teacher, why that placement or why, that accommodation or that goal is or is not appropriate for the student. So it's very, very important to be meeting for these IEP meetings in advance to kind of anticipate what they want to make sure they're saying to the student, and to the parent if they're present, and how they're going to respond to parent concerns as they arise. And Dana mentioned agendas earlier. Agendas are very, very important. I think they help keep the team on track. They help ensure that each team member has a time and place to speak about what they want to say about the student and their present levels and their goals. And I think it also helps keep the parent on track. I find oftentimes when we have a very forceful parent, sometimes IEP meetings can end up being parent-led meetings, which we don't want, because then at the end of the day, we become subject to the parents' whims and their questions and where they want to go with the meeting. But we want to make sure that the district is leading the meeting and each team member has an opportunity to speak. So agendas can be super helpful in that way.
Agree. I think that this is another good opportunity. I know that different clients have used the IEP facilitation process through ISB, and some people like it. Some people, are not so enthused by it because it is sort of formulaic and there's different parts in the process, and it certainly takes longer than sometimes you may have set for an IEP meeting. That being said, having someone go through that process and understand that process and sort of personalizing that to your district so that IEP meetings are somewhat standard throughout your district and that everyone understands what they're supposed to do when they get there, both the staff members and the parents, right? Because if you have a protocol and that starts with an agenda, it starts for what you're going to expect team members to have ready for the IEP, what data you're going to expect them to have ready, what information they're going to bring. That really is helpful. So that sort of transitions us into what is the role of each team member. I can't not stress enough that everybody needs to play a role. An IEP meeting where you're going to change placement from sort of a resource level, like just as an example, if you're going to change placement from like a resource level program to a more self-contained program, and the general education teacher does not speak up at all, right there you have a problem because you need to be explaining when you're making these changes, you need to be explaining the reason for the change in terms of the student's skill level, the student's ability to participate and benefit in different settings. And really, the gen ed teacher is the expert on developmentally and skill wise and program wise what a student of that age is typically doing. And that has to be part of the conversation. Um, you know, it's very important, again, for everybody to be part of the conversation, not just the leader, not just the case manager, not just the assistant principal for special education, but everyone. The most common, we have attorneys that we work with that if just the LEA speaks or if just the attorney speaks, they consider that an open invitation to actually like call on someone. And it may be, who knows who it is? It may be like, who do I think is the person that is most nervous about participating in the meeting? Oh, could it be this very sweet, um, speech language pathologist who is like in her second year and is very competent and wonderful with kids, but not as used. And I'm going to try to argue with her and pick on her data and argue with her about why she's making this recommendation. And we don't want that to happen. Once you're in that situation, obviously that's for an attorney to intervene and sort of try to redirect the conversation. But the better alternative is to never get there. And you don't get there if everybody's sort of playing their part and prepared on what to say.
And another thing that comes up too, if only the LEA is talking, is that gives a very good platform for the parent's attorney or the parents to jump in and say, hey, you predetermined this because you're the only one who's talking. No one else from the team has reiterated or uttered an opinion on this. And yet you're saying an opinion and you're making a decision on it. So oftentimes they'll say, well, there must have been predetermination because no one else is talking on that. That's why it's super important for everyone to give an opinion. That way you can show that a conversation is happening. You're considering this, let's say, placement decision in real time and everyone's chiming in and a decision is being made based on this discussion, not on a discussion that occurred before the meeting.
I think the other thing is that you have to be ready to reflect. So just going into the next slide and just ensuring meaningful participation from parents, but also from everyone on the team. And obviously making sure the team is ready to be truthful with parent, to have open communication, non-defensive. We need to like make sure that we're telling parents where it is. I can't tell you how many meetings I've gone to over the course of the years, and it's been a lot of years. And I have a very close personal friend who's a school psychologist, and we always talk about how many meetings have we gone to for a kid with like significant developmental delay, significant cognitive impairment. And the first thing the teachers say, he's so bright, he's so smart. Okay, in certain circumstances, I believe in the potential of students and everyone shows insight. But to hear that, for a parent to hear that when it does not match what the data shows about the student, again, you need to pick more specific things to talk about. We're looking at the bullet in the middle of the page. Use data. Use data. Okay, this is where this student did on this assessment, and this is where this falls in comparison to typically developing peers. These things, which most people can access, he just could not access. It's really important that you make sure that parents understand what you're saying and where the student is at in comparison to typically developing peers. Like that's always sort of the where the rubber meets the road. Conversely, you'll have situations where teachers will come in and make a huge deal about how the kid never does his work and doesn't do this. And it's like a seventh grader. Okay, many seventh graders do not do their work. So we really are trying, to prepare staff in advance. When we talk about needs at an IEP table, we're not talking about needs that every single student has, regardless of their disability status. If seventh graders could have the executive functioning of adults, they wouldn't be in seventh grade, right? Their development is not perfect. So you really have to paint a picture for parents so that they understand what point their child is at. And they're not going to understand it if you just show it on a bell curve. You're going to have to give anecdotal examples. It's very important if there are issues, or if you misspeak, or if you confuse something, make sure that you address that right away. Again, going back to the documents 3 days in advance, that should prevent things like typos where a person has the wrong name in a report. Something like that, like, can sort of sink a meeting before it even happens, and you have to own it. So if something goes out in the 3-day draft, that's a mistake, fix it. If it's still a mistake at the table, fix it. Um, and again, individualized answered. Show that you know the student. This always, I do think is always somewhat of a mystery as well, because we want people talking that know the kid, not the person that comes in and out and is the supervisor and may not see the kid. The people that see the kid every day are going to give the most meaningful anecdotes about the progress, are going to be able to interpret and explain the data in a much better way. Now, that's not to say that an administrator prior to a meeting can't coach staff members and help staff members formulate talking points, because you do use that experience of working with parents um, to help you formulate those points. So again, there's a balance here, and that's why I do like sort of the facilitated IEP process and an agenda, and you develop some sort of meeting norms or another good things. Because meaningful parent participation does not mean the parent or the parent attorney hijacks the meeting. I think you have to start off, like, starting off with meeting norms is a very good idea. Having a place on the agenda where you review the norms, like, we're not going to talk over each other. We're going to try to speak. We're going to have the discussion, but we're going to also try to speak succinctly and clearly. And we're not going to just repeat ourselves to get a point made, because people can hear, people can process. I think sometimes it does help to take some notes and show the parents notes, like, we have noted what you've said. We don't need to repeat it again and again. We've noted it. I don't know why people think that, like, you can win arguments. Maybe it's because they're used to arguing with children, but you're not going to win an argument just by saying the same thing over and over again. And you're not going to further understanding. You're not going to, like, it's not going to move the process over in any way. So, I mean, and that should be said, we're not going to move this process forward by repeating our positions over and over. We've each put our position in. This is what the position of the team, the school members of the team are. Let's move on to the next topic, on our agenda, or let's close the meeting. It's also very important to not avoid decisions, to not put off decisions. But again, you do that on a case-by-case basis. You may have a situation where, you're thinking that the student may need a change of placement and you want to be proactive about it. And you start talking about it maybe at an IEP meeting before the IEP meeting where you actually change placement. That can be valuable at times, but that doesn't work with every parent. Some parents are going to take that approach, and your intent when you take that approach, I think, is to, get the parent used to a different idea than what they had. Some people are just going to take that and abuse it, and they're never going to let you make the decision, and they're never going to let you move forward. So you have to sort of read, get to know the parent, get to know how to sort of gain that trust, what they need in order to make a reasoned decision, and how to keep the situation calm. Sometimes you're not going to be able to, sometimes you can do everything right and you're not going to be able to. So let's go into a little bit in depth, as we have our last few minutes here together, about a common issue that causes a lot of problems. And that's placement. You need to make sure that you are having very candid but diplomatic discussions about placement. Diplomatic means you don't just drop placement on a parent, like, when they don't even understand the continuum of placements and the differences between different IEP placements initially. So not that you have to explain, do a tutorial on IDEA each time you have an IEP meeting. And certainly as parents come to the IEP, you don't have time to explain all the legal intricacies of every part of the law. But even at the first IEP, even at the first placement, you should be discussing more than one option. And that gives you an opportunity to explain to parents just the continuum of options and have a general idea what those continuum of options are. Then you need to really be able to address why is the placement needed and why it's different. Um, you know, in terms of like what the goals are, why do you need this change in placement to meet those goals? What are the barriers to meeting the goals in the current setting? What would be the benefits in the new setting of working on the goals? Is it skill building? Um, is it the setting, the actual opportunity to have more small group instruction? And here's where you really, really need the experience of everyone on the team to be able to distinguish between the two. And because what parents will do will be like, well, why can't you do that in here? In this placement, I know. And you need to be able to articulate why that's not feasible, or even if you do it in the known placement, it is not going to give the student the same experience as, the proposed change. Again, going to moving on here, making sure that you're walking through all of these issues with the team prior to the meeting happening. So looking at, I sort of have like a three, looking at talking points. You need to, like, beforehand, and Kristen, if you can just move the slide up a little bit. Yep. With the team, develop these talking points that I was just referencing. Like, why are we recommending this change in placement? And here are some examples. Like, certainly, I'm sure you guys could, at your school, at your location, come together and brainstorm talking points for all the reasons that you're going to change placement. This is just a few. But that's sort of the first step to the preparation, is the talking points. Like, which of these talking points apply to this kid? The second step, which I think is critical, and we're almost done here because I know we're coming up on time, is to make them personal to the student. And I sort of have these 3 C's here. Connect, right? Connect the reasons for the change to how what the student's individualized needs are and how they present in the classroom. Here's, and you give anecdotes and give examples, because that not only shows that you know the student, it shows that you've thought about this. You've thought about the best way to give this student access to instruction and help them make the growth that you feel their potential is to make. Second C is contrast. Again, what does a typical peer do that students cannot do, and how the proposed change can remediate this issue? I think about back to like teaching, and this student, in order to participate with peers or to do any kind of work that a student initiated, is going to need significant pre-teaching. And significant pre-teaching time for that is not part of this gen ed classroom. And it's not sufficient to do it in a resource, like something like that, some sort of specific example as to what typical peers are doing that this student just cannot do or cannot access, that they will be able to access and will be able to build that skill in another setting. And then finally, collaborate with the parent. Don't just blindly refute everything they say. And again, you don't want to make it a tit for tat. But, understanding where they're coming from and their fears about the placement, you can't just blindly refute those. You have to have some real answers for what their concerns are. And again, that is something to talk about with the team in advance. So 3 takeaways: set expectations for the IEP meetings, identify everyone's role and responsibility, and prepare. collaborate and come up with those talking points, come up with those data points, come up with those anecdotes about what's going on in the day-to-day. Definitely come up with some positive things to say about the student and positive things to say about the change you're proposing and how that's going to help the student maximize their potential. And then try not to, be planned enough so that you can prevent mistakes. Use pre-meetings, make sure you review the drafts, send everything, follow the procedures so that procedural errors and procedural missteps do not get in the way of a successful meeting. So that's it for today. Kristen, is there anything else you want to add to the takeaways?
I guess just one more thing. So we were talking about the roles of everyone before, and I just want to say, while we are here, if we're your attorneys or whoever your attorneys are when we're present at an IEP meeting, we are there to help the team. But that doesn't change the roles that each IEP team member still plays. They still need to provide their opinion and participate because while we are there to back up your guys' opinion, we can't be the ones talking and providing those opinions. You're the ones who are interacting with the students. So the IEP team members still do need to participate and provide their opinion even when an attorney is present. Obviously, we're there to get involved if the parent's attorney gets involved, but we do still need active participation from every team member. And then I did just want to point out, I think I saw one question on what what to not include in those draft 3-day draft documents that go out. Do not include the placement page and the related service page. So that one page that lists the placement for the student and then the exact minutes that are being recommended for each related service. So, like 50 minutes per month of speech services. That's the pages that you don't want to include in those draft documents.
Okay, there's one more question too about clarifying sending out a draft IEP if it's a reevaluation versus an initial evaluation. So obviously, if it's a reevaluation, it's you want to send out the draft IEP unless you're going to not make the student eligible anymore. Obviously, then you would not. But if it's an initial evaluation, obviously sending a draft IEP document sort of lets the cat out of the bag. So, I mean, I do think that is a judgment call based on the meeting that you're going to have. If it is an initial evaluation for somebody that is just coming into the school district as an early childhood student and they have an autism diagnosis or some sort of disability that is more low incidence, you're not going to just hold back the IEP. If you're doing an evaluation where it really is a question, you are really questioning whether there's going to be eligibility, then you may want to take advantage of having two separate meetings and not providing an IEP draft at the initial evaluation meeting, but setting an IEP meeting shortly thereafter, but within that 30-day time frame. So those are two approaches you can take there. Someone asked about copies of the slide. We will definitely make those available. And how can you not include placement pages? Again, the draft is really to give the parent an opportunity to understand, the student's needs. And the placement is sort of the last thing that you're talking about, and the placement is driven by the rest of it. And so we don't include the placement pages because, again, that would be too close to predetermination and making a placement prior to the parent consideration. That's just my 2 cents. Kristen, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it sets you up for a predetermination argument against it. So basically, obviously, goal language, that's something that's very wordy that, you're gonna go back and forth and maybe edit based on parent comments or team comments. So it makes sense to be sending goals and that other information beforehand, but placement and related service minutes are going to be a result of the conversation that happens at the meeting.
So thanks to everybody for joining us today. We will have these slides posted for the people that participated. And of course, you can look at this again on our YouTube channel. Take care and have a great rest of your day.